Can you remember the last conversation that just looped and looped? That's not what happened. Yes, it is. No, it's not. Yes, it is. How did it feel to talk to someone who always has to be right?
Oh,
Do you feel like you have a good connection with that person? Or perhaps maybe you feel like you want to get away, or maybe it causes you to get reactive yourself. Today, we're continuing our series on losing strategies, and we're going to be unpacking strategy number 3, needing to be right. That's what's up next here on Master Your Marriage.
welcome back to another episode of Master Your Marriage. And if you're tuning in for the first time, we're so glad that you're here. We release a new episode each week, so hit that subscribe button at the bottom so that you can stay in the loop and get notified the next episode when it comes out. And if today's conversation really hits home, we'd be grateful if you take a quick moment to leave a 5-star review and a comment. It really helps us spread the word and get the algorithm working for the show.
Great. Well, over the last 2 weeks, we have been revisiting Terry Real's losing strategies and how these patterns tend to show up when couples hit what Terry Real calls the crunch.
The crunch.
And the crunch happens in all relationships when the blinders come off and we start to see each other more clearly and that disillusionment sets in. And because of that, there becomes this discrepancy between the relationship that we thought we were going to get and the partner that we thought we were going to get and the one that we actually have and the one that we're living with.
This can cause a lot of discomfort. And as a way to manage that discomfort, we turn to probably one of about 7 different losing strategies or patterns to try to close the gap. Dr. Terry Real calls these patterns losing strategies because no one wins when these strategies are utilized. But unfortunately, these strategies are used all of the time, and they drive us further and further into disconnection and loss of harmony.
So why do we use these strategies? Well, generally, we use them as a way to try to pressure our partner to yield to us. Because remember, we just said there's a discrepancy or a gap that we're trying to close between the relationship we want and the one that we have. And so we're trying to pressure our partner to yield to us. And that is what is happening here with the need to be right. We are trying to pressure the other person to take our position. And this creates a power struggle.
A tug of war, you might say.
And as we've said the last 2 weeks, we want you to realize that you're probably using these strategies, these patterns, which is really hard to admit. You're going to be tempted as you listen to this series to say things like, that's not me. I don't do that. But instead, we invite you to try turning inward and ask yourself, how am I doing this? Because healthy relationships start from the inside out. We need to start internally before we can expect anything to change externally.
Yeah, that internal work is hard, and it's really difficult to pause and self-reflect and see that we have been talking or maybe acting in a way that when used on us, it actually really hurts. So for example, I get really annoyed when someone talks down to me. I really don't like it when somebody's condescending to me. Yet, as Charlotte knows, it's one of my favorite weapons when I get dysregulated. And it's really humbling and embarrassing to realize that I do it and I do it well. We can't work to change something unless we shine some light on it, unless we realize what's happening and then make a plan or a strategy to keep it from happening in the future.
So please keep in mind that all people do these patterns.
Yeah.
If you're human, which I know that you are, you've probably done all of these strategies, or at least most of these strategies. And that doesn't mean there's something terribly wrong with you. These are popular patterns that all human beings do because we're not perfect and because we do make mistakes and because we are acting out of that frustration because of that discrepancy, and it's all we know how to do.
Yeah. But as soon as we start seeing these things in ourselves, rather than justifying our actions, we can create change that will really help us heal the relationship. So back to the third losing strategy, needing to be right.
Okay. Have you ever heard the saying, you can be right or you can be happy?
Yes, I've heard that.
Have you ever wondered why you can't have both? Well, here's why.
Why can't we have both?
Well, if you need to be right and you're willing to fight for it to be right, then you're going to drive people away. Other people are not going to want to be around you if you do that.
As humans, we need relationships with other people. When we alienate other people, we're really just alienating a part of ourselves.
Mm.
So, why do we have this need to be right? Well, our brain is kind of programmed to be right all the time, which obviously gets us into trouble. Our brain takes mental shortcuts to process information quickly and to avoid the discomfort of us having to change our minds. And this is called confirmation bias, which is huge in the medical world. But when it comes to relationship, confirmation bias is the tendency we all have to favor information that supports what we already believe, while ignoring or downplaying or maybe just outright dismissing anything that contradicts our perspective.
Exactly. So while our brain is seeking to confirm a bias, what it's doing is it's actually filtering out evidence that would also prove that our bias is actually not true. And there's a book called Flow, and it's written by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi.
I'm glad
And
you said that. I can
he,
never get his name right.
and he explains that 2 million bits of information hit our nervous system every second,
Oh,
coming through what we see, what we hear, what we smell, what we touch, what we taste, but we can only handle 126 out of 2 million bits of data. And that means, of course, we're deleting and distorting over 99% of the information. But if our brain didn't filter it out, delete it, distort it, generalize it, then we would be incredibly overwhelmed by the world around us and all that stimulus that is coming in at us. So much so that we would not even be able to function.
I'm always looking for a metaphor because you know me. I'm always looking for a metaphor for what this 126 bits is versus this 2
2 million.
million bits of information. And like you say, drinking from a fire hose, but that's not even correct. It's like there's just so many things that our senses are capturing and disregarding because they're not necessary for us at that moment.
The fire hose works because if you look at like the amount of water that would be coming in a fire hose, and maybe you only have a coffee stirrer
Yeah.
and that's all you can use. And that's the amount of data you're getting out of that fire hose of water.
Yeah. So we have the fire hose of information
Hmm.
and you have a coffee stirrer worth of ability to be able to absorb that
Yeah.
information.
Yeah.
Think about that. And so much is getting past us.
It's doing it because otherwise you would be so overwhelmed by data that you would not be able to
Oh,
function.
you'd be freezing, right? And so our brain does us that favor because it knows that we can only handle certain things. And so it filters out all the extraneous information that either it feels that we don't need or that we don't need. But the problem is it's also constantly affirming and reaffirming our biases and only showing us things that fit within our existing narrative of the situation. Now, I want you to think about this. Everyone has their own brain that is focusing on their own thoughts, confirming their own biases. That means that each person will see the world slightly or significantly different than anybody else will see it.
Exactly. And this is why, if you've worked with me before, you may have heard me say something like, you don't see the world as it is, you see the world as you are, because you are seeing the world through the filter that you've created in your life and in your brain with these biases.
This shows up in relationships all the time. For example, if you think your partner is often dismissive during conversations, you might be fairly hyper vigilant in looking for every short reply or everything seems a little bit sharp or dismissive, while simultaneously overlooking the times when they're attentive and supportive because you're just looking for the negative side.
The evidence.
You're just looking for evidence to confirm your bias.
Mhm. And that's why one of the most powerful things that we can do in relationships is to hold our own perspective more lightly.
I like that term.
So many arguments stem from the deep human need to be right, to prove our version of what happened is the accurate one. But here is the lesson: none of us have a God camera. We do not record events perfectly like an objective video camera. We are constantly interpreting tone and body language and words and gestures through our own filters, through our own emotions, and even through past experiences that we've had.
Absolutely. Just look at the research on eyewitness accounts in crimes. Even though these are high stakes situations and people are genuinely trying to recall what they saw, studies show that eyewitness testimony is surprisingly unreliable. According to the Innocence Project, mistaken eyewitness identifications have contributed to about 69% of DNA exonerations in the United States. We're talking about hundreds of cases where innocent people were convicted, sometimes based solely on someone else's confident yet incorrect recollection of the situation or the events.
Yeah, that's wild to think about.
Yeah.
Very inaccurate. Even though people are trying so hard to get it right, most of the time it's not.
Yeah. Most of the time it's not.
So even research that's out there shows that even our memories are reconstructive. They're not a flawless recording. So you may have a memory, for example, of a past event that you are like 100% confident it is accurate. You might be remembering your birthday 5 years ago because it was a really big event, and you might think that you are 100% confident in how you remember it, but likely it's not, because memories can actually shift over time. And I use an analogy for this. I explain to clients that when you retrieve a memory, it's like retrieving a file on your computer. And let's say you open up that file, you change the file, and then you resave it. You resave it as the new file. What happens to the original? It's gone.
It's gone, unless, of course, we're talking about a Google Drive. But don't you wish your world was that way? You could go back and say, oh, here's where I've edited, added to,
Mhm.
embellished, and changed my recollection of the events.
But our memories don't have the ability to go back and look at previous editions, and so when we retrieve that memory the next time, maybe I'm telling that story about my birthday 5 years ago, do I remember it the way it was originally written, or do I remember it the way that it was last saved? I remember it the way it was last saved.
Remember it the way it was
Then
last told.
I retrieve it again, and of course there's gaps, and so my brain starts to fill in gaps again and change it again and saves it, and then every edition before that is deleted. So
Yeah.
we only remember that last edition. So even our memories are constantly changing.
So what I want you to remember is if eyewitness can get crucial, important details wrong, imagine how easily that happens in our everyday conversations with our partner, especially when we're tired, we're stressed, or maybe emotionally triggered. This is why Charlotte and I have a couple of rules, especially when it comes around these types of conversations.
Mhm.
When it comes to relationships, there is no objective reality. There's only our individual subjective reality,
Yep.
because we both understand that we're never going to get it 100% right, and we're not going to disagree with the details.
And there's no point in trying to discover what the objective reality is because neither one of us have it.
There is no objective reality.
Right.
Second, we won't fight and loop over details from the past. We recognize that we both have this flawed memory, and it's pointless to argue over our recollection of details from past events or past situations.
Yeah. These are both pretty difficult pills to swallow, that there is no objective reality and that there's no point in fighting over the past. These are pretty big pills for couples to swallow when they're in coaching or when they're in therapy, but it's also one of the first conversations I usually have with couples. So when you are in a disagreement with someone, it's important to remember that neither of you have a God camera, and it's entirely possible and very likely that two people will feel right from each of their subjective experiences that are different from the other person, and
Absolutely.
yet both feel right.
Yeah. And most of the time, we don't even pause to consider that this is a possibility. Usually, we wonder how any normal or sane person could actually think different from us.
Mhm.
And that leads us to putting pressure on the other person to yield to our position, which is why we sort of dig in.
Exactly. But think about this. Can you remember a time when someone was pressuring you against your beliefs or telling you that you had it all wrong? What did you do? Did you say, oh, you're so right. Oh my gosh, I see now how wrong I totally am? Probably not.
No,
More than likely, you probably resisted and you probably held on to your idea more tightly.
double down.
You may have started to feel like the other person was not a safe person to open up to, someone who wasn't safe to express your thoughts and beliefs to. And you may have even decided that you don't want to be around that person anymore. So, this need to be right can be so destructive to relationships.
This is why letting go of the need to be right can transform your relationship. Instead of debating whose memory of the event is correct, we can shift to curiosity by saying something like, well, help me understand how you experience that, or why do you feel that? Or what did that moment feel like for you? This small shift immediately creates more safety, creates openness, and it reduces defensiveness.
So let's put that into a real life situation, what
Okay.
Robert just said. So this is a fictitious couple, but it's also based on probably a composite of everybody
An
that
amalgamation
I,
of a lot of
that I
people. Yeah.
work with. We'll call them Wyatt and Morgan.
Same
And
story, different people.
yeah, Wyatt and Morgan both come home after a long day at work. Wyatt walks into the kitchen, sees the dishes piled up in the sink, and he says, kind of casually,
Wow. This is
wow.
a little bit of a mess tonight in the kitchen. Yeah.
And Morgan, who also had had a very stressful day, who had been kind of rushing, wanting to get dinner started, she immediately feels this sudden wave of blame.
Yeah.
And in her mind, Wyatt's comment and his tone sounded sharp. It sounded critical. Like maybe what Wyatt was really saying was, "What's wrong with you? Why don't you keep the house cleaner?" And Morgan, so that's how she's reading the situation. She says, "You know what? I've been working nonstop all day. You have no idea how much it is that I have been juggling." And then Wyatt kind of takes aback and he looks surprised and he tries to explain, "Well, I wasn't blaming you at all. I was just commenting that the dishes are in the sink."
Morgan's memory of the moment now adds in a frustrated tone, the accusatory look, and the clear implication that she's failing in her household responsibilities. Even when Wyatt explains that his intent was innocent, Morgan still can't let it go. She stays angry and hurt, thinking, I know what I heard. You're always like this, making little digs about how I can't manage the house.
And in this moment, Morgan is locked into her interpretation. Her brain even begins to reconstruct the brief interaction through the lens of her past experiences, her stress that she's dealing with, even adding in and filling in his tone and altering it. Because of confirmation bias, Morgan's focused only on evidence that supports the idea that Wyatt is blaming her. Meanwhile, Wyatt over there is feeling totally misunderstood and frustrated that his simple comment got twisted into something negative. That sound familiar? Anybody ever have something like that
Oh,
happen?
yeah, without a doubt. This is where the need to be right becomes so destructive in your relationship. Both partners end up arguing about whose version of this 5-second interaction is more accurate between the two of them, instead of turning towards each other with curiosity and saying, hey, like, sweetheart, can you just tell me what I did that made that comment land so hard for you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Just if we could just add more curiosity, curiosity equals a lot more intimacy.
Well, you usually say, "Just help me understand." Just those 3 words can go a long way.
Yeah,
Just help
without
me
a doubt.
understand. And when couples can step back and say something like that or say, "Hey, I know my interpretation isn't perfect. Can you tell me how you experience that?" It instantly lowers defensiveness and it instantly opens the door to conversation instead of having these looping fights that can go on for hours.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's look at a few other ways this need to be right can kind of come out.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's some sneaky ways that it shows up in relationships. So we're gonna go
Yeah.
through like 2 or 3 more.
Yeah. So our first one is finding backup or an expert to prove that your opinion is clearly the right option. And here's what this might sound like. Hey, so I read an article last week that said happy couples should have sex 5 or 15 times a week.
Oh,
Well,
well, I read another article that said once a month.
yeah. Hey, I'm going to send you this TED talk on why we need better boundaries with our in laws. Really, what I mean is your parents.
So this is kind of a sneaky way to employ needing to be right. And the reason why this strategy is so compelling for us to use is that it allows us to put pressure on our partner to conform to what we want without necessarily owning up to the fact that that's what we want. It's just some expert that says we should do things in a certain way, which, oh, just so happens to be the same way I want to do things. And this tactic really gets people nowhere.
It's a little bit sneaky because you're not really making it about your needs. You're using an expert to say, hey, look, this is what normal, reasonable people would do in this situation. Therefore, something's clearly wrong with you if you can't do what normal and reasonable people would do,
Exactly.
at least based on what this expert says.
So again, a sneaky way of being right where we go out and find other people who will confirm our point of view and confirm our rightness. And we can also call this collecting allies, which is also similar, by the way, to what we do when we're triangulating,
Yeah.
which is a toxic behavior where we go
Yeah.
find an ally to get on our side.
Very similar. All right. So we got a couple more sneaky ways.
We do.
Okay.
Another one is by acting morally superior. And
Oof.
this This can be done. It's also contempt, by the way, which we've talked about before, can be really skillful way to pressure someone to yield to your perspective. And it looks like sometimes just eye rolling. It could be your body language. It could be a harsh criticism. And the undertone of it is, how could you be so stupid for having such a stupid idea, for having such a ridiculous thought? Obviously, a normal person would never think this way.
I like that. Obviously, a normal person. Yeah.
Right? That sort of morally superior tone to talk down to another person to show that you're obviously right.
Okay, another one would be justifying that your coercion is coming from, a good place. And sometimes it is. For example, it could be that maybe your spouse is drinking too much and you're afraid of the path that they're currently on. So you use everything at your disposal to convince them to choose a different path.
But here's the thing to remember is that even if it's coming from a good place, trying to prove that you're right is very ineffective in creating a relationship that is based on choice, that
Mm.
respects autonomy, where you respect one another. And that is something that is hard to remember. There are a lot of things that make it hard for us to give up our rightness. Maybe we have a history with a person where we don't want to yield to them because we don't want them to get the better of us. Or maybe we want to maintain our rightness because we don't want to look weak or inadequate.
And most of these reasons for not wanting to yield come down to, well, our ego. Your ego is very sneaky and it tries to hold on to your position and will not let you yield. Your ego will try to convince you that any normal person would think the way that you think. And it will probably make you say those words too.
hmm But even again, when it's coming from a good place, other people are much less likely to listen to us when we are so attached to being right. And ultimately, in the end, we end up sabotaging ourselves and creating the very thing that we don't want, which is disconnection and isolation from
Ooh.
this person that we love the most.
All right. As usual, we're going to leave you with a couple of reflection questions to take away from this episode. So, first one, when was the last time that I was in a conversation or a disagreement with someone who needed to be right? And what was that like for me? This should help you recognize how damaging this pattern is for maintaining connection with friends or in your relationships.
Okay, number two, I just want you to observe when you have felt like you had to justify or you felt compelled to prove that you were right. Just notice what are some times where you felt that need to be right in
Yeah.
you?
Number three, what might your best self be doing in these situations where you've attempted to prove your position?
And then lastly, what wisdom, maybe something you heard us say today on the show, what wisdom would you like to remember the next time you feel compelled to prove your point?
Mhm.
Well,
All good ones.
the good news here is that simply becoming aware of your pattern makes a huge difference. In coaching, I'll often encourage couples to pause, which you can do at home, and just ask, what evidence might I be missing that doesn't fit my view? Or how might my partner have experienced that moment differently from me? And when we can shift from defending our bias to genuinely being curious about our partner's subjective reality, it will reduce defensiveness and it will build a stronger connection.
Oh, it's all about connection,
Mhm.
maintaining connection, maintaining harmony.
Which these losing strategies prevent us from doing.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I think that's a wrap for today. Subscribe so that you don't miss next week's losing strategy. And thank you for spending time with us today. If this episode resonated with you, please leave that 5-star review and comment and share this episode with somebody who might need it.
Remember, be kind to each other this week. Put each other first. It's the small things done often that create the biggest impact.
Until next time.